Thank you for asking me to speak today. I'm going to talk briefly about narrative and the cultural contexts of health. First of all, let me define a narrative. A narrative or story has a number of features, including characters, that is, people, a setting or context, some action, a plot in which we use literary devices such as metaphor or repetition to convey what we call narrative causality. This happened because of that. A story tends to have surprise or sometimes trouble. Something goes wrong and then has to be fixed. It has social and cultural meaning, and it also has moral significance. I recently produced a monograph for the World Health Organization Europe on the cultural context of health. This is freely available on the internet. You can download it. And I want to give you an illustration of the value of narrative research in capturing the socio-cultural influences on behaviour. And I've chosen this study by my own team, a study of South Asian women with diabetes in pregnancy. The aim of this study was to understand the multiple influences on behaviour and hence the risks to metabolic health of a South Asian mother and her unborn child. To theorise, using what we called a nested hierarchy model, how these influences interact and build over time, and thirdly, to inform the design of culturally congruent multi-level interventions. I will explain what a nested hierarchy model is in the later slide. So what we did in this study was we recruited 45 South Asian women from a London setting, all of whom had pregnancy complicated by diabetes, either gestational or pre-existing. These women were interviewed in their own language. Some of them were interviewed in English, but we offered them the opportunity of being interviewed in their South Asian language by a multilingual researcher who simply asked them to tell the story of their diabetes. If you read the monograph that I've published with WHO, you'll find the detail of how to do this kind of narrative research. The stories were audio taped and translated and transcribed, and we analysed them using Amartya Sen's health capabilities model. Briefly, that model says that human behaviour is, of course, the result of individual choices, but those choices are strongly shaped by the cultural and material environment in which the person is living. We found a number of stories, some of which were very short term, some were medium term, and some were very long term. The short term stories that these women told were mostly about a current or recent pregnancy, and they depicted pregnancy with diabetes as a very stressful and out of control state, much more so than diabetes when they weren't pregnant. They described a lot of physical symptoms and the impact of their behaviour on those symptoms. For example, many of them described exercise as making them feel unwell. They had to go to bed after they attempted to exercise, or the feeling that eating during pregnancy made them feel better. And this again was very common across different South Asian groups in London. And the other main storyline that we got from the short-term stories was accounts of advice, particularly from other women, mothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, neighbours, other women that they met in the antenatal clinics. And these accounts of advice were very powerful and had a strong influence on their behaviour when pregnant. We found medium-term stories about family life, about community life, and about past encounters with healthcare professionals. The stories the women told of their domestic lives were ones of doing a lot of physically hard work in and around the house, and having to prioritize those domestic tasks and chores, entertaining guests, cleaning the house, taking children to and from school, in a way that they didn't seem to ever finish their domestic work. There was always something more that they needed to do. They also told stories of progressive weight gain with successive pregnancies, and they compared this to stories of other women, their sisters or their mothers, that with every pregnancy the woman put on a bit more weight, and this was very much seen as normal within the South Asian community. And thirdly, past experiences. Very many of these women had had a story of going to the doctor with a symptom or a problem, and the doctor allegedly saying that the illness was really not very important, and he or she didn't need to see the patient. And this, of course, had shaped a behaviour of not going to the doctor, so that they didn't get humiliated or rejected. Long-term stories were told about the distant past, particularly of genetic heritage. Many would describe a strong family history of diabetes, or say that their cultural group was very predisposed to diabetes. So they knew about the high risk of diabetes in the South Asian populations. They told stories about cultural heritage. They explained the cultural importance of women in particular being subservient to the needs of the family and the community. And they also described rather powerfully a material heritage. Some described, for example, the very deep famine in Bangladesh in the early 70s, and others told stories of food insecurity, having had a period in their life where they couldn't get enough food. So we analysed all these stories together in a model. Of course, all these stories were nested within other stories, and so the short-term stories would be nested within medium-term stories, and those in turn would be nested within long-term stories. And you can see here I've tried to depict a timeline where all these different stories, which came out all mixed together, but we could separate them out in terms of the timeline of the story. Now, you don't have time to study this picture in great detail now because I've only got 15 minutes, but you can look at the paper if you're interested afterwards. We used these stories, plus the genetic information that we obtained from other parts of the GIFTS programme of work. We used these to build a very detailed model of how socio-cultural influences and also the material influences of the built environment and poverty and overcrowding in the local community were influencing the behaviour of pregnant South Asian women with diabetes, and how that led to weight gain, but during and after pregnancy, loss of fitness, and an adverse metabolic environment for the infant that they were carrying. So I'm not going to stay on this slide too long because I don't want to go over my time. But let me tell you the conclusions that we drew from that study. We concluded that the rising prevalence of diabetes in South Asians in the UK is mediated by patterns of behaviour in pregnant women, what they eat, how much exercise they take, that are poorly matched to their metabolic needs. That this behaviour results from individual lifestyle choices, but that these choices are very powerfully shaped by cultural and material influences. We also concluded that narrative research can begin to unpack these multiple interacting influences on behaviour choices, and by doing that can influence the design of educational programs, public health programs to support South Asian women and to try and break this cycle of the intergenerational transmission of high diabetes risk. Thank you for your attention. I'm hoping now to dial in and take questions by Skype.
It's a pleasure to have you here. First of all, I would like you just to receive from you a brief comment on what you think is the importance of this document that you have written on the guidelines of the WHO Europe on narrative research.
Well, I was delighted when the WHO asked me to produce this document because many people around the world have recognized the importance of narrative, and you know, we all enjoy narrative. Everybody who is human enjoys a story, but I think this marked a big turning point when an organization like the WHO, which mostly has been basing its work on quantitative data, on epidemiological data, on economic evaluations, when an organization like that realizes that narrative can add something more to the database, I think it's really, really important. So I believe that narratives are important in their own right, but in the context of what the WHO was doing, they were saying we have certain metrics, GDP, infant mortality, any metric, any quantitative metric of health status, and we want to compare across countries. But the problem is, you can have two countries and they can be identical with these metrics, but actually the lived experience is completely different. And I think the best example of that was the little case study that I did on the experiences of refugees and asylum seekers. And the narratives really added to the quantitative metrics of, you know, how many refugees, the income status of the refugees, the mental health status, and you can tell that by just reading the narratives. But it's absolutely brilliant that WHO wants to pursue this approach and that they want to train people in doing it, because, as you know, you can collect stories, but to collect them systematically and use them as research data, use them to inform policy, we need to use robust techniques.
So, traduco velocemente, solo 2 righe. È stata una cosa assolutamente improvvisa e inaspettata che la WHO chiedesse di produrre un documento sulla narrazione, sulle potenzialità della narrazione. La WHO si è sempre concentrata su quella che avevamo chiamato medicina basata sulle evidenze, cioè su probabilità, cifre, numeri, e quando doveva andare a studiare per un determinato paese gli indicatori del benessere si era concentrato sul prodotto interno lordo, sugli anni di vita, sulla mortalità infantile. Si è visto che tutto questo era molto limitato, c'erano degli indicatori grossolani, che bisognava invece utilizzare degli strumenti molto più raffinati, quali la narrazione, e la professoressa Greenhalgh dice che uno dei casi più importanti è quello che ha scritto sui rifugiati, proprio per capire attraverso la narrazione che cosa vivono e come si possono organizzare i servizi di cura. I just tried to translate a little bit fast. I hope that the translation was reliable. Anyhow, I have a question for you. I was very much impressed by the fact that you have used the capability approach by Amartya Sen, who won, I think, the Nobel for Economy, I don't know in which year.
I don't know the year.
Yeah, I loved Amartya Sen, and I really was, hoping that it was a different way to be an economist somehow. Anyhow, when I see that you're using this approach, capability approach, how does it nest? How is it twinkled with narrative medicine?
Well, I think if we look at the definition of a narrative, you have narratives are about characters, they're about people, or sometimes they're about animals or whatever, but normally they're about a person who faces some kind of challenge in a context. That's what a story is. When we tell stories to our small children, we tell stories about people in particular circumstances. And I think the Amartya Sen's health capabilities framework is about people in contexts. And so narrative is a very natural approach for looking at that perspective. And in fact, I would say that a lot of academic analysis of people's decisions, people's behaviors, involves abstraction. And so we abstract and we talk about things as something like self-efficacy or any of these constructs which are actually an abstraction of what people are doing. The narrative doesn't abstract, it tells it like it is. Yes. And you could argue that one of the things that narrative is doing is protecting us from our temptation as academics to do too much abstraction.
Thank you for this, because I think this is fundamental. It was also Oliver Sacks who was saying that narrative brings the concrete, brings the real things, the real stuff, and defends us from abstraction, from abstract theories. So thank you so much for this.
And yet, actually, Sen's approach is in some ways, it's a grander theory, but in the end, we can actually look at the real chances and the real choices that people make rather than turn it into variables. And there's a big problem with variables. And I think now that we're moving towards narrative, of course, we need to look at variables. We need to draw graphs, we need to draw maps, all that kind of thing. But the narrative does something. It replaces something that abstraction has taken out.
Okay.
And that's exciting, I think.
I love it. We love it. We all love this class loves it, I can tell you. And there are also young students who never heard about narrative medicine up to 2 months ago, and now they are just fascinated by this new world. So we are, it's really beautiful.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and well, thank you so much. We are, as I just told you, we are in delay. It would be lovely to talk to you longer, but anyhow, thank you for all what you did, because I tell you, to the class, some of the people do not know her, but she is one of the mother of narrative medicine. She published in 99 the famous, ha pubblicato nel 99 il famoso articolo Medicina basata sulla narrazione in un mondo basato sulle evidenze, nel 99 su British Medical Journal, e questo è stato l'articolo, diciamo, che ha lanciato, se non altro in Europa, la medicina narrativa, per cui è per noi un grandissimo onore averla in collegamento, perché tutti noi le dobbiamo molto. Quindi thank you so much, Trisha, and hope to see you soon. We will all read your guidelines. They have been delivered to everybody. Grazie mille. Il messaggio è che la narrazione porta concretezza all'astrazione delle teorie degli accademici. Quindi questo mi sembra molto interessante. Grazie. So,
thank you for inviting me. Cheers. Bye bye.